The Star Wars galaxy is a huge place, full of countless species, some much stranger than others. But it's not the only galaxy in the Star Wars universe, and at several times, stories have touched on this, most prominently through the threat of invasion. Beware, invaders from beyond the intergalactic void are here and they mean business. Now, before we get into this, we've gotta talk galaxies. The main Star Wars galaxy, or the galaxy far, far away, is self-explanatory. But during one pivotal scene in Attack of the Clones, everything changed. While Obi-Wan is in the Jedi archives looking for data on Kamino, he sees this screen, depicting the main galaxy and, seemingly, two other smaller galaxies. One of these small companion galaxies, as they're called, is Companion Auric. This is the Aurebesh word for the letter A, but the satellite galaxy is also known as the Rishi Maze, something Dexter Jettster mentions in the film, with Kamino supposedly being 12 parsecs outside the Rishi Maze. Sorry, don't know what happened there. So, the Rishi Maze is canonically a separate galaxy that orbits the main galaxy. The other satellite galaxy featured on that archive screen is, fittingly and only in Legends, Companion Besh, or B. But this one is also known as Fire Fist, and actually predates Attack of the Clones by over 15 years. Kind of. But we'll get back to that in a second. For now, we're flashing back to 1977. Surrounding the release of the original Star Wars film, Marvel Comics released a 6-issue adaptation of the movie that continued into an ongoing series that eventually lasted 107 issues in its entirety, until 1986, which hawk-bat-eyed viewers will recognize is 3 years after Return of the Jedi formally ended the character's stories until Heir to the Empire. That's right, issues 81 through 107 are the original post-Endor storytelling, with underrated author Mary Jo Duffy continuing the story of Han, Leia, Lando, Kiro, Pliff, Danny, and... Who else? Oh yeah, Luke. And the big overarching event of this post-6 era was what Lucasfilm themselves dubbed the Forgotten War. This is the Nagai Tof War. Soon after the Emperor's demise and the Bakura incident, a movement slowly began across the galaxy, agents of chaos seeding conflict on worlds rebuilding after the Empire's fall. Remember, this was 1984, the idea of a continuing galactic civil war was not a thing yet. These agents were all of the same species, the Nagai, gray-skinned with sharp features, and they were sowing conflict to set the stage for an oncoming invasion. Seemingly unconnected events on Herdessa, Kashyyyk, and Kabray were actually the result of Nagai spies and manipulation. As the rebellion reorganized itself into the Alliance of Free Planets, the slowly boiling conflict with the Nagai came to a T on the planet Kinnuine. On the rocky and watery world, Luke Skywalker first came into contact with the light whip-wielding Dark Lady Lumaya, who easily bests the young Jedi using her unorthodox weapon and immense skill. Before encountering the Alliance, the Nagai intercepted a group of Imperial vessels under Lumaya's command, allying themselves with the enemies of the former rebels, giving the Nagai the boon of an Imperial fleet at their disposal. Following his escape from the Nagai's captivity with Kiro's help, Luke uses a second red Shoto lightsaber to best Lumaya, using the two blades to twist and manipulate her many light whip strands. But as Luke fought Lumaya, he recognized her as former undercover Imperial spy Shira Bree. Unbeknownst to Luke when he thought she'd died, she was taken by Vader and trained into a cyborg Sith acolyte. After a spectacular duel, seriously this is one of the best lightsaber duels in Star Wars comics, Luke and Kiro stood over a defeated Lumaya, and the sky began to shift. Something was emerging from hyperspace. Lumaya puts it best. The Nagai invasion fleet is here. With their allied Imperial Remnant forces, the Nagai land on Kinnuine to set up a base for their invasion. As Luke and co watch from the hills, hundreds of Nagai filter out of landed vessels, ready to take on the Galaxy and Alliance. Launching from Kinnuine, the Nagai Imperial Allied fleet made their first advances, their individualized and uniquely spindly ships carrying them and their Macabre allies, another species allied with the Nagai. While evacuating their base on Endor due to this new threat, the Alliance, now joined by Mandalorian allies, was attacked by the Nagai and the Macabres, but the Alliance's forces led by Lando fought back in space, while Luke, Han, and Bren Durlin's forces held off the Nagai on the surface. The war had truly begun, and battles popped up across the galaxy, specifically along major hyperspace lanes. As the war continued, Leia and her Zeltrons were stranded on the seemingly dead world of Trenwith. They were wrong to think it was lifeless, though, as they stumbled into a world at war. The Nagai weren't fighting the Alliance, though. They were fighting an unknown enemy. Leia met an injured Nagai there, something that deeply humanized them for her, as his people had been hunted down by these new unknown enemies. It's eventually revealed that in their home galaxy, Fire Fist, as mentioned earlier, the Nagai had been in conflict with the green-skinned Tof for centuries. The pirate-like hulking beings flying across space in galleon-esque starships fully equipped with sails. Across their galaxy, the Nagai were pursued and systematically eliminated, all while gaining allies in other species the Tofs had oppressed, like the aforementioned Macabrees and the shipbuilding Faroon. With their allies, the Nagai decided that the only way to beat the Tofs in the long run was to escape and prepare a sizable enough military force. But escape to where? Well, the Great Sky River, of course, also known as the Galaxy Far Far Away, which was visible in the night skies of their home planet. Placing spies across the galaxy, the Nagai started an information network and waited for a time of instability when they could fully escape the Tofs, a time that came after the death of the Emperor. The rest of the Alliance met the Tofs on the planet Zeltros, as both the Nagais and Tofs ambushed an event there at the same time, their conflict finally becoming apparent to our heroes. A battle broke out, and Luke boarded the Tof flagship with his Hiromi and Hujib allies, taking over the ship and establishing an alliance between the Free Planets and the Nagai, while Lumaya defected to the Tofs. After a month of the Nagai and Alliance's combined forces fighting across the galaxy, the Tof began to lose ground. A team of one-time enemies consisting of Alliance leaders, Mandalorians, Zeltrons, former Imperials, and Nagai warriors set off for the planet Saijo, where after another battle they defeated the Tof Prince, Lumaya, and all of their forces once and for all, ending the conflict and integrating the Nagai into their new society, thinking that it would all be peaceful from then on, until the 90s and the Thrawn of it all. Recently, the Nagai and Tofs were introduced into the Canon timeline as well, the Nagai being a key element of the 10-issue-long Out of the Darkness New Republic comic series. In this run, Luke Skywalker helps lead a Nagai resistance movement, fighting against the wicked Anzadi witch Reyna Ascure, who allied with the Tofs in enslaving the Nagai. Though we do actually finally visit the Nagai homeworld of Nagi in the series, and its capital is even named after a Nagai character from the original comics, we don't actually have any kind of confirmation about if the Nagai or Tofs are extragalactic at all in canon. There's not really a mention of it. Back to Legends, the Nagai were a remarkably early entry into the Star Wars Expanded Universe, appearing before anything from the 90s, yet being almost completely forgotten aside from a few scant references here and there, until the 2000s with their prominent return in both the Legacy and Knights of the Old Republic comics, the former featuring the iconic Darth Nil, a Nagai member of the One Sith, serving under Darth Krayt over 120 years after his species was integrated into the galaxy. Speaking of integration into the galaxy and the Legacy era though, it's about time we talk about what you're really here for. The Yuuzhan Vong, who, in all honesty, bear a striking narrative resemblance to the Nagai. In 25 AVY, the galaxy was at peace after the signing of the Pelion-Gavrisum Treaty, with a new Jedi Order under Master Luke Skywalker growing every day. But little did the expanding New Republic know, there was an invasion force waiting at their doorstep. The Yuuzhan Vong had been preparing this invasion for thousands of years, spending what was said to be millennia by some in transit between their home galaxy and the GFFA alone. In that home galaxy, long in the Vong's past, a war emerged between two ancient self-replicating droid species, both sentient and both full of hate, causing mass casualties and forever scarring the Vong to the idea of artificial intelligence and technology. It was during this conflict that the Vong developed their biotech. Over the decades, the Vong focused more and more on combat and pain, developing the culture that eventually invaded the GFFA, and began fighting back in the ongoing droid war. Somehow emerging victorious, the Vong weren't ready to stop. They became maniacally conquest-fueled, conquering their entire home galaxy, destroying or exiling the droid armies, and enslaving any non-Vong species they came upon, some of which were then ancestrally kept as slave armies. In control of their galaxy with no challengers, the Vong began fighting amongst each other in what became known as the Kremlevian War. This brutal and long-lasting conflict devastated their galaxy, rendering it uninhabitable, and destroyed their somewhat sentient homeworld. causing the Vong to coalesce back into a single entity and depart their home galaxy, looking for a new one, with the earliest scouts emerging, somewhat unbelievably 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. The Yuuzhan Vong's regimented religious society was divided into a caste system, consisting of the warriors, political intendants, priests, shapers or crafters of biotechnology, workers, and the shamed ones. Shamed ones being those who had been dishonored through their body's rejection of modifications, or committed heresy, and were forced to work menially for their entire lives, seen as rejected by the gods. The Yuuzhan Vong were a technophobic species and religion, believing that all electronic or manufactured creations were heretical to their pantheon of gods. And as an arm of the culture that the Vong saw as heretical, they hated the Jedi just as much, if not more. Mysteriously though, the Yuuzhan Vong existed outside of the Force, making them deeply challenging for the Jedi to deal with, let alone their lightsaber-proof weapons and armor and capabilities as warriors. The Yuuzhan Vong warrior culture itself comes from the fact that their entire religion was focused on the idea of pain. They worshipped it, tortured themselves to feel it, and worshipped gods that surrounded the idea of pain. Their creation mythology revolved around their gods sacrificing parts of their bodies to create the galaxy, which inspired the Vong to do the same, modifying, scarring, and manipulating their bodies into what they saw as a more holy state. And as an extremely technophobic culture, the Vong only used grown and genetically modified biotechnology for all the things the GFFA's citizens would have used normal technology for. Their ships were made of coral, with volcano-like blasters. They threw razor-sharp bugs at enemies, even in space, wielded snake-like creatures as whips or rigid staffs, and wore dense crab shells for armor. Through infiltrations by the advanced party of Praetorate Vong in worlds surrounding the galactic inward vector known as Vector Prime, the Vong gradually destabilized the region before entering the galaxy. This strange species, politically minded and forward-thinking, then began their slow trudge towards Coruscant at the planet Cernpedal. There, they used something called a Dove Invasal, a directed black hole generator to pull the planet's moon to its surface, a genocidal move from deep in the annals of Vong history that resulted in the death of the mighty Chewbacca. But they didn't stop there, as their forward push continued through Dubrillion, Dantooine, Bimial, Ord Mantell, and eventually further in at Gindyne and Fondor. The dark tide of the Vong continued their onslaught of the galaxy, gradually bringing ruin to the planets in their warpath, sparking a refugee crisis, all while terraforming conquered worlds into quote-unquote factories, growing new weapons and vehicles for the war effort. Meanwhile, the new Jedi Order just debated what must be done, Skywalker caught in the middle and his pupils having very different philosophies on fighting the Vong as they continued without mercy. Some citizens of the galaxy saw the Yuuzhan Vong's invasion and subsequent refugee crisis as something they couldn't stop, and joined the Yuuzhan Vong's side as something known as the Peace Brigade. The Peace Brigade sought out bounties on Jedi of the New Jedi Order, placed writ large after War Master Savong La was humiliated by young Jedi Jacen Solo on Duro. This led to the destruction of the NJO's main headquarters at the Jedi Praxim on Yavin 4, and the transformation of the moon into a Vong production site. Anakin Solo, escaping Yavin with his fellow student Tahiri Vela, was aided by a Yuuzhan Vong of the Shamed One caste named Vua Rapung. Rapung was viewed as redeemed by the actions of Anakin and Tahiri, making the Shamed Ones on Yavin 4 somewhat sympathetic to the Jedi, a seed that would soon grow into something much greater. But to bring their full might even more intensely onto the Jedi, the Vong introduced the Voxen, hybrid force-detecting Jedi Eaters that were any Jedi's worst nightmare. Killing many Jedi before their widespread deployment into the galaxy was heavily delayed and impacted by the sacrifice of Anakin Solo in killing their genetic template. Not long after this, the Vong took Coruscant, a world that seemed more heretical than anything to them. It was completely covered in technology. In order to fix this, the Yuuzhan Vong Shapers got to work seeding the planet with natural plants, eventually covering its entire surface with plant life, moving the planet closer to its sun to promote growth, and filling miles-deep streets with water. All of this was done in the service of remaking their ancestral homeworld, Yuuzhan Tar, the name that was now given to the Vong-formed Coruscant. With even more manipulation, the Vong shattered one of Coruscant's moons, arranging the resulting dust into the cherry on top, a rainbow ring around the planet. Now in control of the galaxy's most important planet, the Yuuzhan Vong's conquest continued, but as more and more came under their control, they needed more forces, a need that was difficult to meet. And while the Vong were struggling to raise these forces, the New Republic became an alliance in exile, rebels once more fighting a technologically advanced foe with whatever resources they had. But at the same time, deep in the underworld of Coruscant, something more interesting was going on. No Manor, former Yuuzhan Vong loyalist, had become shamed, and voluntarily grouped up with the Vong's oppressed Shamed One class in the Undercity. Ever the opportunist, Anor saw a chance at redemption, and maybe even victory. To get there, he declared himself Yu Sha, prophet of the movement that had started years early on Yavin 4, the Jedi Heresy, or as the Vong said, the Jedi Heresy. The Shamed Ones had begun to see the Jedi as their salvation, after Anakin redeemed the shamed Vua Rapung, so the Shamed Ones integrated the Force users into their pre-existing pantheon of gods, and No Manor pushed this to its extremes, asserting that the Force was the remains of the Vong's creator deity, Yun Yuuzhan, whom the species was named after. This Jedi heresy later played a major role in destabilizing the Vong-formed Coruscant, as a combined galactic fleet led by the newly formed Galactic Alliance took back their capital, after pushing the Vong back for months. The defeat would not have been possible, though, without the return of Zonoma Sikat. This moving planet was known only as a legend in the hushed rumors of the seediest cantinas. But after seeking it out, Luke Skywalker and his family discovered it, and found that it was the child of the sentient world that the Yuuzhan Vong originated from, crossing the galactic void itself. During the battle, Zonoma Sikat appeared in the skies over Yuuzhan Tar, and the supreme overlord of the Yuuzhan Vong was defeated. His jester, though, the real mind in control of the Vong, was defeated as well, bringing an end to the deadliest conflict in galactic history. 365 trillion dead, a galaxy forever changed. The Vong themselves were spared by Skywalker, upon the agreement that they would do away with their caste system, completely disarm, and move on to Zonoma Sikat, reunited with their homeworld at last. Few Yuuzhan Vong remained in the galaxy after the war, but some of those who did remained allies with the Jedi into the future, especially with Luke Skywalker's descendants. One of whom, Cole Skywalker, partnered with the Vong to use their biotechnology to restore worlds they'd destroyed. But a Sith plot manipulated their healing, and resulted in the Vong being hated by the majority of the galaxy for the rest of Legends history. And now that we've discussed the two major intergalactic invader species, it's time to dig into the rest of them. The minor instances of this, the first two of which are actually connected to the Yuuzhan Vong. Now, you may recall me mentioning that a war between two self-replicating droid species in the Yuuzhan Vong's home galaxy was a core element of their backstory. Well, those two types of droids actually completely predated the Vong in terms of real-world release timelines. They are the Silentium and the Abominor. The Silentium first introduced through the character Vuffi Ra in the Lando Calrissian Adventures from 1983, and the Abominor being introduced through the character The Great Heap in the 1986 Star Wars Droids TV movie of the same name. Drawing these two types of droid into this story really is a masterwork in the art of retroactive continuity, bringing extremely unconnected and obscure characters into a completely new light of importance. The Silentium were chrome, polygonal, or even round droids that lived mostly in space. Their culture was complex and mathematical, while their leadership consisted of two gigantic Silentium known as the One and the Other, the entire rest of the species being known as, fittingly, the Rest. These droids were invented by an unknown species, probably five-legged, who went extinct following their star-going supernova, the droids surviving and becoming sentient, and quite orderly. The Abominor, on the other hand, were mechanical monstrosities, built of seemingly random parts. They consumed other droids, using their parts to grow and become more powerful, some Abominor becoming larger than planets. Thousands of years after the war with the Silentium, an Abominor was used by Imperial Admiral Terrenold Screed, serving the Empire's purposes over a decade before the Battle of Yavin. The Silentium, unlike the Abominor, who we only know about the Great Heap of, had a full and communal presence in the galaxy far, far away, even releasing scouts like Vuffi Ra, who served the Silentium until being reprogrammed multiple times and before being lent to Lando Calrissian and later becoming his partner. During Calrissian's legendary Battle of Thonbaka, a fleet of gigantic Silentium halted the conflict, returning for Vuffi Ra, and even played a game of sabacc with Lando. Because there's nothing like a good game of cards, even when you're an artificial alien intergalactic superintelligence. And back in the 1977 Marvel series, there was another intergalactic element, one that it seems like nobody talks about. This, of course, is ship. Star Wars Issue 38, Riders in the Void, introduced this being, and with it an incredible story. After being chased by Imperials, Luke and Leia jump to hyperspace, finding themselves in the intergalactic void upon emergence. There, they meet a mysterious, lumpy green vessel known only as Ship, and after fighting a robotic defense mechanism, meet its pilot, an ancient being that has fused with their vessel. The pilot was part of a military force consisting of many of these ships, and they fought in a war against an unknown enemy, an enemy that massacred their people, leaving only the ship and its pilot. Seeing as there was nothing left, they left their galaxy, the pilot's consciousness eventually fusing with both the computer and the ship, making them one giant being. The ship then returned Leia and Luke to the galaxy far, far away, and, oh yeah, instantly disintegrated Imperial forces. I like that part. But what about the Dathomiri? Wait, what? Yeah, Season 1 of the series Ahsoka did the unthinkable for live-action Star Wars. It finally took us to a different galaxy, and there confirmed that the Dathomiri, the Witches of Dathomir, came from a different galaxy on the planet Peridia. There existed a specific hyperspace route, the pathway to Peridia, that allowed them to traverse the intergalactic void, allowing them to settle on the planet now known as Dathomir. All of this working particularly well with the precursor species driven from the world by the witches mentioned in the novel Last Shot. I'm always going to plug Last Shot when I can. It's a great book. But other than information in Ahsoka about the Dathomiri, we really don't know anything else about their history and how it pertains to this other galaxy, so that's all we got for now. Anyways, thank you so much for joining me on this journey. For my reading recommendation today, I think I'm going to go with Vector Prime by R.A. Salvatore. This is the first book of the New Jedi Order series and kicks off the whole Yuuzhan Vong event, but I'm also going to recommend all of the comics by Mary Jo Duffy from the original Marvel 1977 series. That whole series is an underappreciated corner of the Star Wars galaxy, and I think every Star Wars fan should read it.